The Lakeshore Ridge HOA told my 7-year-old twins they were not allowed to ride their bikes on the sidewalk anymore, and 2 weeks later, the same people who made that rule were standing in my driveway asking me, very politely, to save the neighborhood from itself. I know that sounds dramatic, like one of those stories people exaggerate online to make themselves look clever, but I promise you, the only thing exaggerated here is how much power a retired man with a clipboard thought he had over 2 kids with sparkly helmets. It started on a warm Sunday afternoon, the kind of afternoon that makes you forget bills exist for a few minutes, and I was standing near the mailbox with a cup of coffee gone cold in my hand, watching my twins, Lily and Noah, try to ride without training wheels for the first time. Lily had this purple bike with tassels hanging from the handlebars, and Noah had a red one he'd begged for because he said it looked fast, even though at that moment he was moving at roughly the speed of an elderly turtle. Their knees were wobbling, their faces were tight with concentration, and every few seconds one of them would look back at me like, "Dad, are you seeing this?" And of course I was seeing it. I was trying to burn it into my memory, because those are the little moments you do not get back. We lived in Lakeshore Ridge, a neat little planned community outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. All brick mailboxes and trimmed hedges and people pretending not to peek through blinds. And honestly, for the most part, it was a good place to raise kids, quiet streets, decent neighbors, enough porch lights at night to make the whole place feel safe. The problem was the HOA, or more specifically, a man named Marvin Cole, who had somehow turned a volunteer board position into his personal version of federal law enforcement. Marvin was not the president, at least not officially. He was the compliance chair, which is a fancy way of saying he spent his retirement measuring grass and ruining Saturdays, and he had this black clipboard he carried everywhere like it was a badge. I saw him coming before he said anything, crossing from the opposite sidewalk with that stiff little walk of his, chin up, shoulders back, clipboard tucked under one arm, and I remember thinking, please not today, man. Let the kids have today. But Marvin Cole was not a man who let joy pass uninspected. He stopped at the edge of my driveway, looked at Lily as she wobbled past him, then looked at Noah, then looked at me with the deep disappointment of a man who had just witnessed a felony. "Caleb," he said, and that was my first warning, because people only use your first name like that when they are about to pretend they are being reasonable. I gave him a nod and said, "Afternoon, Marvin." He did not smile. He lifted a laminated sheet from the clipboard, and I swear to you, the sunlight actually flashed off the plastic like he was unsheathing a sword. "Recreational wheeled activities not permitted on pedestrian walkways inside Lakeshore Ridge," he said. I blinked at him. Recreational wheeled activity. That was the phrase he chose for 2 second graders learning to ride bikes. I thought maybe he was joking, or maybe there was some context I had missed. So I gave a little laugh and said, "Marvin, they are 7. He looked past me at the kids and said, "Age does not change liability." That was when Lily stopped pedaling. Noah put one foot down. Both of them just stood there, looking from him to me, trying to figure out if they had done something bad. If you are a parent, you know that look, that little collapse in their face when an adult makes them feel ashamed for something innocent, and it hit me harder than I expected. Marvin taps the laminated sheet with one finger and read from it like he was announcing a verdict. Section 18C, subsection 4. Sidewalks are intended for pedestrian traffic only. Bicycles, scooters, skateboards, rollerblades and other wheeled devices may cause surface damage, create safety hazards, and expose the association to unnecessary risk. He said unnecessary risk like my son was hauling explosives. I looked at Lily's tiny purple bike, then at Marvin's polished loafers, and for a second, I almost laughed right in his face, not because it was funny, but because my brain could not find another reaction. "So where exactly are they supposed to ride?" I asked. Marvin adjusted his glasses. "There is a public park 4 miles east of here." 4 miles, I said, across Highway 17. "There is a crosswalk," he said. "A crosswalk for 7-year-olds with bikes." He nodded like that settled it. Noah's little shoulders dropped, and Lily quietly asked, "Dad, are we in trouble?" And that question did something to me. It did not make me explode. Not yet. It did not make me yell or threaten or storm into the next board meeting like some righteous suburban warrior. It just flipped a little switch somewhere deep in my chest. I told the kids to bring the bikes up the driveway, and Marvin watched them do it like he had successfully prevented a disaster. Then he leaned closer, lowered his voice just enough to sound official, and said, "Caleb, I do not want this to become a fine situation. That was the moment I really looked at him. I mean, really looked. And I saw it clearly. This was not about sidewalks. This was not about safety. This was about a man who had found one small corner of the world where people had to listen when he spoke, and he was not going to give that up, not even for two kids who just wanted to feel brave for 10 minutes. I said, "Understood, Marvin." That was all. Just 2 words. He seemed pleased with that, like he had won. Then he tucked the sheet back under his clip and walked away across my lawn without even asking if he could cut through it. The funny thing is, if he had come over like a neighbor, if he had said, "Hey, we have had some complaints, maybe keep them slow around corners, maybe watch for dog walkers," I would have worked with him. I'm not unreasonable. I have lived around people long enough to know that community means compromise, but Marvin did not want compromise. He wanted obedience. That evening, Lily and Noah barely touched dinner. Noah kept pushing peas around his plate, and Lily asked if the sidewalk belonged to Mr. Kent. Cole and my wife Rachel shot me this look from across the table, the kind that said, "Do not say what you are thinking in front of the children." So I did not. I washed the dishes, took out the trash, kissed the kids goodnight, and then I walked out back to my detached workshop, the one the HOA had been using for 3 years without paying a dime. See, when Lakeshore Ridge upgraded its old street lamps to those fancy smart LED fixtures, the contractor needed a central place to mount the lighting controller and backup relay. And because my lot sat near the middle of the community, and because I was stupid enough back then to believe goodwill came back around, I let them put the control cabinet in the rear corner of my workshop. No rent, no formal lease. Just a handshake, a thank you email, and a vague little permission form nobody had looked at since. I opened the workshop door, pulled the chain light, and there it was, grey metal box, little green indicator light, quiet as a secret. I stood in front of it for a long time, thinking about Marvin saying liability, thinking about Lily asking if she was in trouble, thinking about all the neighbors who'd been fined the mailbox paint, trash cans visible from the road, Christmas decorations left up until January 3rd like that was a moral failure. And then I noticed the breaker labeled Community Exterior Lighting, sitting right there under the safety cover, waiting like it had been listening the whole time. I am not proud of what I thought next, but I would be lying if I said it did not make me smile, because sometimes, when a man builds his little kingdom out of rules, the most satisfying thing in the world is realizing he forgot who owns the castle wall. Now, I want to be very clear about something, because I know some people are already shaking their heads. I did not walk out there planning to become the villain of Lakeshore Ridge. I did not have thunder in the background. I was not wearing a cape. I was just a tired dad in old sneakers standing in a dusty workshop, looking at a breaker box and thinking about how strange it was that Marvin Cole could throw around words like liability when it suited him. But the HOA had never once bothered to make a proper agreement for the electrical equipment sitting on my private property. That little detail started eating at me. They wanted rules. They loved rules. They lived for rules. Marvin could quote sidewalk policy like scripture, but when it came to something that benefited the board, suddenly everything was neighborly understanding and community spirit. So I stood there with my hand on the safety cover, and I told myself I was only looking. Then I opened it. Then I told myself I was only checking the labels, and my finger found the breaker, and I swear, there was this one quiet second where I could have walked away and been the bigger person. I could have closed the box, gone back inside, watched some late-night TV with Rachel, and spent the next 6 months arguing in board meetings while Marvin smirked into his clipboard. But then I pictured Lily dragging her little purple bike into the garage like she had done something wrong, and I pictured Noah asking if Mr. Cole could take his bike away, and that was it. I flipped the breaker down, 1 click. That was all it took. No sparks, no alarm, no dramatic boom, just a tiny mechanical sound. And somewhere outside, block by block, the perfect warm white streetlights of Lakeshore Ridge blinked out like somebody had pulled a blanket over the neighborhood. I stood in the doorway of the workshop and watched the street go dark. Not dangerous dark, not horror movie dark, just inconvenient dark, honest dark, the kind of darkness most neighborhoods used to survive before everyone decided they needed decorative LED lamps every 40 feet. A dog barked somewhere. A garage light clicked on across the cul-de-sac. One porch door opened, then closed. And I laughed once, quietly, because it felt childish and powerful and stupid and deserved all at the same time. When I went back inside, Rachel was sitting at the kitchen island with a mug of tea, And she looked up at me the way wives look at husbands when they know something has happened before a word is spoken. "What did you do?" she asked. I said, "Nothing permanent." She closed her eyes for a second. "Caleb," I held up both hands, "they will be fine. It is streetlights, not oxygen." She did not laugh, but I could see the corner of her mouth fighting for its life. The next morning, Lakeshore Ridge woke up like a spoiled cat whose automatic feeder had failed. The neighborhood Facebook group, which was usually just lost dogs, lawn service recommendations, and passive-aggressive posts about trash bins, turned into a crime scene board. Anybody else notice the streetlights are out? Does anyone know if Duke Energy has been called? My husband says it is probably a grid issue. Someone posted a blurry photo of a dark intersection like they had captured evidence of a supernatural event. By noon, a man named Greg from Sandpiper Lane had written a 7-paragraph theory about a cyber attack on smart city infrastructure, even though our neighborhood barely had decent Wi-Fi at the pool house. I sat at my desk pretending to answer work emails and refreshed the thread every few minutes, like it was playoff coverage. Marvin did not post at first, which told me he was panicking privately. Marvin loved public correction. If he had an answer, he would have delivered it with bullet points. By evening, people were walking dogs with flashlights. Kids were being called inside earlier, and 3 different neighbors had suddenly discovered that their house numbers were impossible to see from the road. The first real inconvenience came on night 2, when Mrs. Halpern, who lived 2 doors down and treated her golden doodle like a decorated war veteran, stepped off the curb wrong and rolled her ankle. She was fine, mostly embarrassed, but by the time the story hit Facebook, you would have thought she had survived a wilderness expedition. Then packages started showing up at the wrong houses. A grocery order meant for the townhome section got delivered to a retired couple who had never ordered oat milk in their lives. A DoorDash driver left sushi on the porch of a man who was allergic to fish. A teenager trying to find a birthday party drove around for 20 minutes and finally called his mom from the clubhouse parking lot, furious and lost. And the whole time, the streetlights stayed off. On day 3, Marvin called me. I was in the garage helping Noah raise his bike seat because apparently, forbidden bikes still needed maintenance. His name popped up on my phone, and I almost let it go to voicemail. But curiosity is a weakness. I answered as casually as I could. "Hey, Marvin." His voice was tight. "Caleb, quick question." That is never a quick question when an HOA person says it. He cleared his throat and said, "The lighting vendor believes the system may have been disconnected at the central control point." I leaned against the workbench and looked at Noah, who was pretending not to listen. "Oh yeah?" I said. Marvin paused. "Since the control cabinet is on your property, I wanted to know if you had noticed any unusual activity around your workshop." I looked through the open garage door at Lily drawing chalk stars on the driveway, and for a moment, I thought about telling him the truth. I thought about saying, "Yes, Marvin." The unusual activity was a father getting tired of a grown man bullying children with laminated paper. But instead I said, "Nope, everything looks normal to me." There was a long silence. Then he said, "We may need access." I said, "You can have the board send me whatever request they think is appropriate." He did not like that. I could hear it in his breathing. "Caleb, this is a community safety issue." And there it was. Safety, the cousin of liability. The magic word people use when they want power but do not want to admit it. I said, "I understand. Send it over." Then I hung up before he could turn it into a lecture. By day 5, the whole place had lost its mind in that very suburban way where nothing truly terrible is happening, but everyone behaves like civilization is cracking. Joggers moved their routes to daylight. Dog walkers formed little flashlight caravans. One guy backed into his own mailbox and blamed visibility, even though that mailbox had been in the same place since 2009. The board scheduled an emergency meeting, and my neighbor Trent, who served on the landscaping committee and considered gossip a public service, came over afterward with the glow of a man carrying classified documents. He found me in the driveway while Lily and Noah practiced slow turns between 2 orange cones. "You did not hear this from me," Trent said, which meant I was absolutely about to hear it from him. I said, "Of course not." He leaned closer. "They are eating Marvin alive. Residents want to know why the system was placed on private property without a proper access clause. Somebody brought up the bike rule, too." I raised my eyebrows. "The bike rule?" "Oh yeah," Trent said, grinning. Marcy Dunn stood up and said, "Maybe if the board spent less time harassing children and more time reviewing infrastructure agreements, we would have lights." I had to turn away because I did not trust my face. Trent kept going. Marvin tried to shut her down, but people started clapping. Actual clapping. That was the first moment I realized this had become bigger than me. The darkness had done something the fines never could. It made people compare notes. Suddenly everyone remembered their own Marvin story. The widow fined for leaving her trash bin out one extra morning after surgery. The young couple warned about a baby stroller visible on their porch. The Ramirez family forced to repaint their front door because teal was too expressive for community standards. For years, people had swallowed those little humiliations because each one felt too small to fight alone. But inconvenience has a way of turning separate frustrations into a crowd. On day 7, a white utility truck pulled into my driveway, followed by Marvin's silver Lexus parking at the curb like a bad omen. The technician who stepped out was a broad-shouldered guy named Andy. Polite face, clean boots, no appetite for neighborhood politics. Marvin came up behind him with that clipboard, though I noticed he held it lower than usual. Andy said, "Mr. Whitaker, we have been asked to inspect the lighting control cabinet in your workshop." I nodded. "Sure," I said. "Do you have the current electrical inspection permit, proof of insurance, naming me as additional insured, and written authorization from the board outlining scope of access?" Andy blinked. Marvin's face hardened. "Caleb," he said, "this is unnecessary." I turned to him. "Is it? Because I have been thinking a lot about liability lately." The word landed exactly where I wanted it to. Marvin's jaw moved, but nothing came out. Andy looked between us and sighed like a man who suddenly understood he was standing in the middle of someone else's divorce. "I do not have those documents with me," he said. "Then I am not comfortable allowing access to high-voltage community equipment on my private property," I said. I kept my voice calm, almost friendly. That was the best part. Marvin could not accuse me of yelling. He could not say I threatened anyone. I was being responsible. I was being cautious. I was being exactly the kind of person he had trained this neighborhood to become. Andy nodded, almost respectfully, and said he would report back. Marvin lingered for one extra second after the truck door closed, and for the first time since I had known him, he looked less like a man in charge and more like a man realizing the rulebook had pages he had never bothered to read. He leaned toward me and said, "You are making a mistake." I smiled and said, "I sure hope not." Then I went back to helping Noah tighten his helmet strap while the whole neighborhood waited in the dark. By the end of the second week, Lakeshore Ridge had turned into one of those places where everyone still watered their flowers and waved from driveways, but underneath it, you could feel the whole neighborhood humming with irritation. The lights were still out. Marvin was still telling people the board had everything under control, and nobody believed him anymore. That was the part he had not planned for. Marvin understood rules, he understood warnings, he understood certified letters with a red print at the top, but he did not understand people getting tired at the same time. He did not understand that a neighborhood can push up with one dumb rule, then another dumb rule, then another for years, as long as everyone thinks they are suffering alone. But the second people start talking, the whole thing changes. Trent told me the emergency board meeting on Thursday night was standing room only. Folks came in carrying flashlights like props in a courtroom drama. Mrs. Halpin showed up with her ankle wrapped and her golden doodle wearing a reflective vest. Marcy Dunn brought printed copies of the sidewalk regulation and asked why children were being treated like insurance threats while an entire lighting system had been managed on a handshake. The Ramirez family brought photos of their old teal door, which apparently had become a symbol of creative oppression, and somebody even mentioned the stroller warning, which made half the room groan because everybody remembered how ridiculous that had been. Marvin tried to restore order, according to Trent, by tapping his pen against the table and reminding everyone that decorum mattered. And Marcy said, "Decorum would be easier if we could see our own driveways at night." People laughed. That laugh mattered. It meant Marvin had lost the room. The next afternoon, I was in the garage oiling Lily's bike chain when I saw 5 people walking up my driveway. Marvin in front, but not leading exactly, more like being carried along by consequences. Beside him was the HOA president, a woman named Joanne Mercer, who I had always liked well enough because she seemed normal before meetings turned her into a corporate memo. Behind them were 2 board members I recognized and a lawyer I'd only seen once at the annual budget meeting. A narrow man in a navy suit who looked deeply unhappy to be standing near children's sidewalk chalk. Lily and Noah were riding slow circles near the basketball hoop, helmets on, shoes scuffing the concrete whenever they got nervous. Marvin glanced at them, and for once he did not reach for a rule. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped out. "Afternoon," I said. Joanne gave me one of those smiles people use when they are trying to apologize without officially admitting fault. Caleb, do you have a moment? I looked at the group, then at Marvin, then back at Joanne. I suppose I do. Nobody spoke for a beat, and the quiet was almost funny, because 2 weeks earlier Marvin could not wait to lecture me, but now the man seemed allergic to his own voice. Joanne opened a folder. We have reviewed the recreational walkway policy, she said, and the board agrees the language was too broad. I waited. She glanced at Marvin. He looked like he had swallowed a lemon. Too broad, I said. Marvin finally cleared his throat. In application, he said, it may have created them unnecessary hardship for family. I almost admired the gymnastics. Not wrong, not cruel, not absurd, an unnecessary hardship. I nodded slowly and said, my 7-year-olds called themselves bad kids for riding bikes. That is not a hardship, Marvin. That is shame. And you put it on them over concrete. His face tightened, but he did not argue. Joanne stepped in quickly. The board voted this morning to rescind Section 18C, Subsection 4, effective immediately. Children may ride bicycles, scooters, and similar devices on community sidewalks, provided they yield to pedestrians and ride at safe speeds. Noah stopped, mid-circle. Lily turned so fast she nearly tipped over. Wait, she said, we can ride again. Joanne looked at her and softened in a way that made me think maybe she had forgotten what this was really about until that exact second. Yes, sweetheart, she said, you can ride again. That should have been enough. Honestly, if they had come with that 2 weeks earlier, I probably would have opened the workshop and flipped the breaker with a smile. But now, there was a lawyer standing in my driveway, and everyone knew we were not finished. Joanne handed me another document. We also want to formalize the association's use of your workshop space for the lighting controller. The lawyer spoke then, careful and dry, like every word had been weighed on a postal scale. The proposed agreement includes monthly compensation, defined access windows, emergency access procedures, proof of insurance, indemnification, and an inspection schedule. I took the pages and read the first few lines. They were offering $275 a month. Not life-changing money, not even close. But after 3 years of free storage and free access and free neighborly goodwill, it felt like watching a bully buy back his own stick. Rachel had come out onto the porch by then, arms crossed, saying nothing, but I could feel her trying not to smile. I looked at Marvin. You know what the strangest thing is, I said. None of this had to happen. He stared at me. I kept my voice low because the kids were close and because quiet words sometimes cut better. If you had walked over that day and said, Caleb, there are concerns. Can we talk about keeping the kids safe? I would have listened. If you had treated my family like neighbors instead of violations, I would have worked with you. But you came over with a laminated sheet and made 2 little kids feel like criminals for being children. Marvin looked down at the driveway, at the chalk stars Lily had drawn, at the tire marks from Noah practicing starts and stops, and for once the clipboard was not in his hands. It was tucked under his arm, useless. I'm not going to pretend he became a changed man right there. Life is not that neat, but his shoulders dropped, and he said, quieter than I expected. I handled it poorly. Joanne looked shocked. The lawyer looked relieved. I looked at Lily and Noah, who were pretending not to listen with the subtlety of raccoons in a trash can. I signed the agreement. Joanne exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since breakfast. The board members shook my hand. The lawyer handed Rachel a copy because he had clearly identified the smarter adult on the property. Marvin was the last one to leave. He walked halfway to his Lexus, then stopped and turned back. Kids, he said, they are getting pretty good. It was not an apology, not really. But from Marvin Cole, it was practically a handwritten poem. That evening, just before sunset, I walked out to the workshop alone. The air smelled like cut grass and summer rain, and the neighborhood was waiting in that strange way. Places can wait when everyone inside them knows something is about to happen. I opened the gray control cabinet, lifted the safety cover, and rested my finger on the brake. For a second, I thought about leaving it off one more night, just to make the lesson stick. And then I heard Lily laughing out loud, free and loud and completely unaware of how many adults needed to be dragged through darkness just to let her do it. So I flipped it up, one click, down the street. The first lamp blinked away, then the next, then the next. Warm light spilling over curbs, mailboxes, hedges, sidewalks. All those perfect little things people had taken for granted. Somewhere across the neighborhood, somebody actually cheered. I stood there smiling like an idiot in my dusty first honest conversation Lakeshore Ridge had had in years. The next morning, I sat on the porch with coffee while Lily and Noah rode up and down the sidewalk. Not fast, not reckless, just happy. Mrs. Halpin waved with her cane. Marcy Dunn gave me a thumbs up. Even the Ramirez family had painted their front door a shade of blue that looked suspiciously close to teal, and nobody said a word. So was I petty? Absolutely. Was turning off the lights extreme? Probably. Would I recommend it as a conflict resolution strategy? My lawyer would prefer I say no, that I will say this. Sometimes people with power forget that communities are not made out of bylaws and warning letters. They're made out of families, memories, small kindnesses, and kids learning balance on a Sunday afternoon. And when the people in charge forget that, maybe they need a reminder. Maybe not a breaker switch in a workshop. Maybe not 2 weeks of darkness, but something. So I want to know what you think. Was I wrong for flipping that switch? Or was Marvin wrong for pushing a neighborhood so far that one tired dad finally pushed back? Would you have taken the polite route, hired a lawyer, gone to meetings, waited months for common sense to win? Or would you have done exactly what I did and let the whole community feel the weight of one ridiculous rule? Tell me in the comments, and be honest, because I have a feeling half of you are going to call me childish, and the other half are going to ask where the breaker was.